Welcome to the Inside Story. I'm Billy Hallowell, and today we're talking all about former President Jimmy Carter. We're going to get into the details of his life, his faith, and so much more. I'm joined today by Christian Post reporter Michael Gryboski. How you doing today, Michael?
I'm doing all right.
All right. There's a lot to break down here. Obviously, Jimmy Carter, well-known name, former president, but a lot of people, especially younger people, might not know a whole lot about his past, his beliefs. So let's dive into that. Let's start with you telling us a little bit about his life story and his background leading up to his presidential term.
All right. Well, James Earl Carter Jr., that's his full legal name, was born in Plains, Georgia on October 1st, 1924. To appreciate how long ago that was, when Carter was born, Calvin Coolidge was president, Prohibition was still the law of the land, and the first talkie movie wouldn't be released for another 3 years. Carter served in the
Wow.
United States Navy for a few years before returning home in 1953. He married Rosalind Carter in 1946, and they stayed married for 77 years until her death in 2023. Carter started becoming involved in politics in the 1960s. He was elected to the Georgia State Senate in 1962 and then became governor of Georgia in 1971. In 1976, of course, he was elected president of the United States, but he lost re-election in 1980 to Ronald Reagan. From there, he quit electoral politics and focused mostly on charity work, writing books, and he also, for a few decades, taught Sunday school. He is quite possibly the world's most famous Sunday school teacher.
Wow. Yeah, as you were breaking that down, when you say 1924, obviously 2024 just passed, the fact that he lived 100 years, pretty remarkable. And it really feels like people know him more for his post-presidency life
hmm
than they do his presidency. Obviously, he had a controversial presidency in many ways, and yet is a really interesting figure. Now, obviously, when a president dies, it's a big deal. How are public officials and others reacting to his passing?
it's a lot of. There's been a lot of positive reactions to it. A lot of people, even if they didn't agree with him ideologically or politically, or didn't think he was that great a president, they still respect his, sincerity, his efforts, his overall character. Joe Biden and his wife, they released a statement calling Carter, quote, a man of principle, faith, and humility. House Speaker Mike Johnson, he released a statement saying Carter's life was, quote, a testament to the boundless opportunities available in this great nation, end quote. Vice President Kamala Harris commended Carter for being, quote, guided by a deep and abiding faith in God, in America, and in humanity. President-elect Donald Trump stated, quote, while I strongly disagreed with him philosophically and politically, I also realized that he truly loved and respected our country and all it stands for, end quote. So there's definitely a lot of, he was definitely, some of his positions may have been polarizing, but as a person, most people tended to respect him.
Yeah, well, and it's also really encouraging. I thought Trump's response was very interesting because it came out very quickly, and it was very praiseworthy. And I think it drew a distinction between a disagreement with ideology and respecting a person, right? For and saying, you know what, this person did their best to honor America, even if Trump doesn't agree with some of the policies that he had. I thought that was a very interesting response, and I think it's a healthy thing. Obviously, when somebody passes away for Christians, the ability to be loving even in disagreement and all that. So I thought it was interesting to see all of those reactions come through. Now, obviously, I don't want to hammer home this too much, but I think we mentioned Carter. He had been controversial for his presidency and his post-presidency life, really not controversial at all. What were some of the major issues that unfolded during his tenure as president that led to some of that controversy and to his loss in reelection?
Well, Carter, he had a lot of issues with the Middle East, as a lot of presidents do. One of his big achievements was the Camp David Accords, in which he successfully brokered a peace between Egypt and Israel, two countries that had been at multiple wars with each other since the modern state of Israel was founded. Carter championed a lot of environmental protection policies. He really stressed the importance of human rights while in office, made an effort to improve diplomatic relations with China. But there was a reason why he lost re-election. During his presidency, there was a major economic recession that was really beat up people on the home front. He had a famous or infamous speech about malaise and the malaise in the economy, which really did more harm for him than good. He also mishandled the Iranian Revolution, which happened on his watch. His efforts to free the hostages infamously failed. So there were things like that. Some of the things he did while in office have actually garnered controversy in recent days because President-elect Trump has promised to undo a couple of them. I mean, it was Carter who created the U.S. Department of Education, which Trump has openly talked about dissolving or at the least, severely gutting. And Carter was the one who oversaw the handing of the Panama Canal over to the nation of Panama, and which Trump has also talked about, undoing that as well. So some of the things that may not have been too controversial in his own time have since become points of debate now.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting, and it shows the power of the presidency, right? That you can set something in motion that, decades later becomes a point of contention. And, not that everybody wants to get rid of the Department of Education. That's a controversial move too, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. But what presidents do, it matters, whether it's one term or two. Now, you mentioned, and we spoke a little bit about the fact that he's mostly known for what happened after the White House. What did he spend most of his time doing in his post presidency?
Well, Carter focused heavily on charitable efforts. A big one was Habitat for Humanity. He and his wife Rosalind volunteered with them for decades. And also, beginning in the 1980s, Carter became a Sunday school teacher who regularly taught classes at Maranatha Baptist Church of Plains, Georgia. And the funny thing is, he still did both of those things while battling cancer, which kind of puts the rest of us under a pile. I mean, what's our excuse, really? Um, but in addition to that, he also wrote more than 30 books on topics such as faith, morality, human rights. While we don't usually think of his post presidency as controversial, he did occasionally garner headlines for things after he left office. For example, in 2007, Carter published a book titled Palestine Peace, Not Apartheid, in which he argued that Israel was primarily to blame for the ongoing violence in the Middle East. And he got lambasted a lot by both Jewish Americans and evangelicals for that. In 2015, Carter claimed that if Jesus' earthly ministry had been in modern America, Jesus would have opposed abortion in most circumstances, but also would have supported gay marriage. Needless to say, people on both sides of those issues kind of got a little annoyed at him for making those claims. And then there was a time in 2009 when he garnered headlines for claiming that the political opposition to President Barack Obama was mostly based on racism, something that the Obama administration itself actually went out of their way to deny when asked about it. So he's had some controversies in the recent times, and that included a rocky relationship with the Southern Baptist Convention. While Carter was the first Southern Baptist to be elected president, he also publicly left the denomination in the year 2000 over its opposition to female ordination and other theological issues. And he got a lot of critique from theological conservatives over his issues with the SBC.
Yeah, it's interesting because some of those things are pretty big issues, right? I think the gay
Mhm.
marriage one in particular was one where you have a lot of Christians who look at this person who's devoted so much of his life to service. He's devoted his life to teaching Bible studies. And then you have this proclamation that a lot of Christians looking at scripture would say, well, where is he getting this idea from? Which is interesting. And I think, I guess, speaks to the fact that there were some controversies even after the presidency, as you mentioned. What are some of the other details maybe about Carter that people should know, though? Because again, regardless of what people thought about even the things we just mentioned, he had a lot of people praising him in his death. So what are some of the other, noteworthy elements of his life?
Well, he had. I mean, there's. Where do you even start with a whole century of life? I mean, one of the things is that he holds the record for longest marriage of any United States president. He was married to the same woman for 77 years until her death. He's the first U.S. president to reach the age of 100. In 1952, while he was still a naval officer, Carter actually helped stop a nuclear meltdown at a facility in Canada, and it was exposed to a fair amount of radiation in the process. Although I think most would agree that such exposure did not end up shortening his lifespan.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. The fact that he battled cancer repeatedly and made it to 100 and still taught Sunday school while he was battling that, a lot of grit there. Pretty interesting. Well, Michael, I appreciate you breaking this all down. Again, these are important stories. When we lose a president or a former president, obviously, it is a big deal, and it's important to reflect on the life and the legacy, and that includes the victories, the tough parts of that. And so I appreciate you breaking it all down for us today.
Sure, no problem.
Everyone else, make sure you tune in next week for another episode of The Inside Story. We wish you a happy new year, and you can head on over to christianpost.com to read all the news headlines throughout the day. We'll see you again next week.